More people say it's.
Call to order the short-term rental task force meeting for June 15th, 2023. Jamie, will you call the roll? Here.
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 Anderson,
Here.
Clark,
Here.
Hart,
Here.
Mans,
Here.
Gudic,
Great, and I will note, Lauren needs to leave a little early again, and so, she'll just get up and leave when she needs to leave. Yep. Take a look at the agenda. Does everything look okay? And if so, will someone make a motion to approve it?
Approved. Second.
Motion by Kevin, second by Sean. Can you say the motion, Kevin?
Motion to approve.
Thank you.
Motion to approve.
And can you,
I motion to approve the agenda.
Yes.
all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Approval of the minutes. Can someone make a motion to approve the minutes?
Make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
I will second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we're getting to the first public comment. A reminder that this public comment period is devoted to topics that are on tonight or this afternoon's agenda. So when you begin your comment, if you can say which agenda item you're addressing. Do either of you in the room have a comment on the agenda or agenda items? Okay. Anyone on the phone? All right, okay, it closes the first public comment. Now we get into review and discussion. Ryan, do you have any comments before Kyle?
Yeah, I'll just tee it up, Madam Chair. At your last meeting, we kind of had a variety of community engagement options before you to discuss. The task force discussed those. And so we were tasked with kind of taking a look at the feedback that the task force provided, and then coming back with an ultimate, recommendation. I certainly understand where the task force was coming in from in the discussion that occurred at your last meeting. Madam Chair, you wrote an excellent letter to the editor that was in today's paper, letting folks know about kind of the progress that's been made with the task force, as well as when the meetings are occurring, and certainly encouraging and welcoming folks to come to these meetings and speak. One thing I do want to remind the task force of is that the actual resolution that created the task force that the city council passed indicated that the task force would gather resident, property, and business owner feedback in the form of forums and surveys. So I'm going to turn over to Kyle, and he's kind of presented kind of what that would look like.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as Ryan has indicated, we came back after your feedback from last meeting and presented more, I think, what would be somewhat of an extensive town hall, if you will, kind of public engagement. We do understand the opinions and recognize the opinions of the last meeting about collecting public input. However, we felt that in order to validate what the task force has asked and what the task force has come up with, we're highly encouraging a public participation component of this. As we note in our letter, yes, the public is able to come in, speak before or after the meeting, but they don't have a way to dialogue with task force members to really share their ideas. A 3-minute time limit doesn't allow you to convey your thoughts or personas. Yes, you can also write a letter, but then there's not a way to engage with you as members of the task force to hear what the residents are saying about this. So that way, because of that, we came back with a town hall option. It'd be similar to an open house. However, what we have proposed in here is to provide kind of some more directive boards, if you will, public engagement boards. And we'd like to take the comments that have been generated through the task force as some of like the opportunities or key takeaways as positive negatives, and then ask the residents and other stakeholders of the area to validate those findings. So what the board would look like is probably a 3 foot by 3 foot or so, or 3 by 4 foot poster board, and then listing out these type of questions on there, and then asking members of the engagement to come in and place a little sticker on if they feel it's valid, or if they feel, no, that's not valid, we shouldn't continue to focus in on that. That would allow us to not only, again, validate the task force options and opinions, but then ask the public for it. Board number 2 would be the same type for perceived connotations of the short-term rentals. You know, we want to make it and focus it on positive aspects of it and not just, yes, I agree, there's trash everywhere. We don't want it to set that negativity, but we do want to validate residents' concerns with it. So we want to be strategic in how we structure the questions. So we provided just some sample types that we could ask. Again, I know when I've gone to public engagement events, I don't want to read a paragraph and then have to vote on it. So we want it to be short and concise, so it's easy at a glance of what you're asking. So that's what the first 2 boards would look like. And then the 3rd board would just be generalized comments. And from there, we provide sticky notes and ask residents and stakeholders just to provide their general feedback in case there is something on these boards that have not been discussed, or as task force members are engaging with members of the public, and then write down those kind of comments and put them on the board. And then that's a nice visualization at the end of the meeting as well of the town hall to see what kind of comments were received. So that is our town hall perspective for public engagement, and then also to offer a community survey. You know, last meeting, we've had some discussion on surveys. Are they beneficial? Are they not? However, it does allow those who cannot come to a town hall to still have their voice heard. That's where we're at for the public engagement component.
Questions, comments?
Excellent. Kyle, could you have a 4th board? I think I would like to see myself, I don't know, other people think, a board that says like the opportunities, because I think there's been a lot of really good suggestions that's been made by the task force. And to validate those, I'd like to kind of have a board that list out some of the opportunities that we think that are options, and have people tell us, you know, do they like the idea of having a post-it? Do they like the idea of having a contact name? You know, so if it, and that way it gives us some guidance going forward when we're thinking of, are we going to make any recommendation or changes? What is the public feel about the ones that we've already suggested or are considering?
Kevin?
All due respect to all this, I think it's good and we should continue to move forward to gather more information. But in my opinion, I feel like the community has spoke. I feel like we have established what some of the core concerns are at this point, with noise, garbage, parking, and so forth. I feel like it's time to not let this drag out much further, but we can continue to move forward with other things, but make a motion to the council to maybe put some substance down and get some things changed and make progress from that standpoint. Whatever that may be. I don't know how much more there is. I mean, there's issues, but I think they've been established. I don't know what more we're going to get out of surveys and post-its and such at this point, and that's just my opinion.
Lauren?
I agree with Kevin. The only thing that I would add is potentially having a survey that could address whether our residents are interested in learning more about a cap.
Yes.
And if there's caps, what that looks like, if there's caps per zone, you know, per residential zone, if there's caps in general, a percentage, you know, what that looks like. And then a survey that also goes through some of the suggestions that we've been talking about, you know, like the noise ordinances, having somebody, a code enforcement officer that's, you know, hired part-time by the city, those types of things. I agree with Kevin. I feel like we know what the issues are. We've heard so much from everyone. We do know, on top of the garbage and the noise and those types of things, just the lack of community, not having neighbors, you know, that's something that we keep hearing. We don't know what the solution for that is, but a cap is the only thing that we haven't discussed.
Right.
And that's something that we have to see what the residents feel about. And I think we can only do that with a survey.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I will add, I don't think we will probably learn a whole lot more if we had a town hall. I mean, I agree with everybody. We've got a pretty good sense, I think, of what the issues are. But when you're going through a change, any sort of change, giving people the opportunity to feel heard is really, really important. And especially since so many of our meetings, well, all of our meetings to date have been in this time slot, so a lot of people aren't even able to dial into the Zoom. So I don't think the purpose of the town hall is so much for us to learn as for people to feel like they have an opportunity to be heard. And we may well learn. I mean, not to say that we won't learn, but I think having people feel like they have our ear is going to be really important as we make recommendations to council. And then if there are changes as council rolls them out or the city rolls them out. Steve, sorry.
Kind of saying what you did, and I agree with the fact that we're probably going to hear a lot of the same things, and I've kind of said that, but being from the planning commission, and Kelly, you've also been on that. When we talked about this earlier in the year about forming a task force, we made it very clear that the task force wouldn't be the only voice. And that we would reach out to the community through each of us, but also through either surveys or town hall type of forums. So I really do think it's kind of important that we follow through with that, because I know I've had a number of people who have said that they still want to feel that they had the opportunity. So I totally agree that we're probably going to learn, like you're saying, maybe a lot of new things. We might learn which one of the ideas that we have kind of discussed so far might be one of the better ones. But I do think there's a value to it.
Well, there's two buckets of pain we've been talking about. It's the current situation with the current renters. And like Lauren said, it's the cap. We've spent very little time from a cap standpoint. Whether that's a lottery or, like you said, a number and such, that I feel definitely needs more input and more discussion on how to do, if anything, with that. But, noise, garbage, occupancy. Let's do something, get this to the board.
Sean, and then Joe, actually, why don't you go first and then Sean?
It doesn't matter, but I'm actually in agreement. I think it isn't easy for everybody to come here. I think we have to outreach more. To me, it doesn't matter whether it's a survey or a town hall. I like the survey better because people who can't make the town halls, they got one shot, right? But I think everybody gets an opportunity, you get in a week or whatever with the survey, but whatever, you could even do both. It's not a big deal. More to the point is, you hit it right on the head. I don't think it's just caps. I think, we've heard the issues, and I don't think maybe we'll hear some other ones, but I think those are the core ones, right? And I think we need to look not only at cap probably addresses a number of things, right? But are there other things? Can we just break down each one and say, here are some of the things that we're considering that are going to help resolve the issues that we're hearing from the public, right? We've thought it all out. We have it all broken down. And then whether you do it in a town hall, in a survey, or both, right? We've got everything discussed as a task force, right? And are in agreement as to what we think some of the recommendations we are carrying forward. And then let the public weigh in. And maybe they aren't going to accept things like a cap, or maybe, if we come up and say we're looking at 20 to 50%, they come in and they say, 10 or 90 or whatever, right? But I guess the point is, to me, it's not as important what the format is, that it's just that we do it and that we're prepared to do it and that we have the information kind of circulated as a team. That's all.
Sean?
Well, this weekend, I kind of went through all my notes since we started this whole thing. And I walked through town myself because I was curious that how many people were shopping and spending money in town. And I think we're missing a key element of this whole scenario. And I think the key element is some of our STRs are permitted to be in the commercial zone. They are permitted to be in the multifamily zone, and we're bunching them in. I keep hearing the word, we have 200 STRs, 30%. What we're missing is, of the people who are part of the surveys or any of the responses, you know, where are they at? In my notes, I got the hill, the hill, the hill, the hill, the hill, the hill, the hill. Which I understand, there are short-term rentals there, but when I went to look at the map where all the dots are and try to figure that out, I mean, my eyesight isn't great, but it's close to 50% of the 200 STRs are already in an approved area. When I looked at the sheriff's response last week about the noise ordinance, we didn't know, did the call come from a commercial district? Did it come from the Hill? Was the complaint from a commercial district, which is already approved to have noise till 11? So I just want to make sure that we are looking at this thing as a whole, that our town is split. When I walked through town, the noise I heard came from the Wicks Park, Coughlin Park, some of the bars, some people just in general giggling, talking loud. That was a lot of noise there. When I went up into the hill, that particular time I was there, I didn't see much, but I did see a ton of visitors parking their cars and walking into town. So when I saw areas that I knew were STRs, I didn't see wheelbarrows of beer and
Should have come by my
stuff.
house.
I mean, but I also saw several bachelorettes walking through town, bachelors walking through town, boats hooting and hollering, stereos on the river. So I just don't want to have this thing go without knowing that aspect of where are you from? Where do you have this concern from? Because I think that's an important part of this. And if we're going to change an ordinance to put caps on stuff, I think we also got to consider that some areas you can't put a cap on under that ordinance. Then you're going to change that ordinance. And then, you know, it kind of, but I just felt that that was really important. And for me, it took half hour, 45 minutes to walk around and just kind of observe, see, put some more notes in. And I think that's hugely important, but I have it set in my head that, you know, we make our money 100 days a year. So
Right.
June 1st was kind of like the kickoff of it. And so I just wanted to have that in my head too. I mean, we do have businesses that need that, and some new businesses starting that want to have a good kickoff too. So I thought it was important that we just make sure that we think of that side of it as well. And however we get that engagement, I think that that's an important part that we got to find out where you were, just like at the podium, we find out
So
where you are.
can we get a percentage of, or a number in each zone in the city, Ryan?
We have that.
Yeah, maybe that's in there.
Yeah, so, wasn't ready for this meeting. I know we discussed at the last meeting that you wanted some data on how much, what the breakdown is per zoning district, as well as, what do we look like as far as number of units by occupancy? So I was able to get the occupancy data to McKenna, and they're still working on kind of pulling all that together. That's data that you'll soon have. Yep.
Elizabeth and Kathy, any thoughts from you?
I just think what we're mainly hearing is, yeah, it's noise and it's the larger houses. And I think that needs to be addressed, and we can do that through outreach or whatever, but I mean, and I have a larger house, and I'm going to tell you, when my kid comes home from Chicago, it's going to be really loud. It's not going to be because I'm a short-term rental. It's because my kid's home. But I understand there are, I'm very careful. But there are other people that just rent to whoever, and they don't care if there's a bachelorette party. And I think if you, and this may be going in too far, but look at the number of beds per bedroom, and maybe you limit to two people per bedroom, and you don't have the pull-out couches, because that's when they're just filling the houses with as many people as they can, my opinion.
May I comment? Elizabeth, you're spot on. I've reached out to all my neighbors, and fortunately they come and reach out to me just as much. And if I were kind of assimilating all the comments I've heard, or a lot of the comments I've heard, and the concerns and the complaints, I mean, just as recent as this weekend, there was a house in the neighborhood that had over 15 people. They were partying all day long. The police finally were called by multiple neighbors. There's, you know, and if I do kind of look at the map, right, and even include the homes that aren't on the map that are rentals, right? There's maybe, from what I can tell, maybe 3 or 4 homes that are consistently the problems, right? That are generating a lot of the concerns from the neighbors. When I say problems, it's the concerns that I'm hearing, right? And to your point, it's typically when they're overcrowded, when there's a big party and you know, people come in and they don't care about being respectful, right? And so it seems like the larger homes were getting more and more of the frequency. If we had all the data, if it was a perfect data environment, we'd look at the correlation between the number of rooms or the occupancy, even though I think sometimes we get into situations where it doesn't matter what the occupancy limits are. I mean, I've seen buses pull up, full-size buses pull up in front of some of the houses, right? So I do firmly believe that we'd probably knock out a lot of the complaints, at least from what I've seen, either by limiting the number of occupants you're putting into a house or,
Okay.
you know, or the size. It's just my observation. So I think if we are going to be diving down into a more detailed discussion around caps, I think we look at caps in terms of within a dwelling, within a neighborhood, based on whether it's residential,
Yep.
or commercial, and then maybe at the town level. And if we kind of look at it in those 3 tiers, my guess is that's probably what we're going to hear from the public, more and more as they weigh in. So.
Okay.
Relative to the topic, I would just say that I think we absolutely have to have a survey that goes to all owners.
Okay.
But that I just don't see any way other than that. And it should have all of these items identified so that they could give input, mail or
Yeah.
email. Whether we do a town hall or if there's time to do a town hall, I don't know. I mean, we're already at summer, so.
So in terms of survey, is everybody on board with doing a survey?
I think in the survey, to address your question, one of the things then you'd put is where do they reside?
Mhm.
And then either we can look it up, or it'd be nice if we could have like a little map so they can kind of pinpoint. Because there are the different zones, because if we said, do you reside up in zone 1 or zone 21, no one would really know.
Steve,
Kyle?
we do actually, our firm just got the ability through Survey Monkey to be able to input maps into surveys now. And I believe it's a dynamic, the ability to put markers in there and get feedback that way. So it's something I haven't used in Survey Monkey before, but we did get a notification from our staff that we have that ability now to do that.
Okay.
So within the survey, we could ask people, which residential zone do you reside in?
Mhm.
And you could show all of those.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's great. Instead of us having, if we get 100 surveys back, you could look up every address and figure out their zone, but it'd be faster if they can kind of tell us
It-
where they
But
are.
are we distributing the survey to property owners, or are we just putting up a link and saying, if you want to weigh in on the survey, click here? I mean, there's
Is
2
there a
different.
way to limit a survey to residents?
Well, I think part of the survey the first question is, what's your address? And you can kind of go from there. But I know this came up at one point, the virtual survey, I think, is going to get you the most data. Maybe a link on the City of Saugatuck website or something, as opposed to some type of snail mail process.
We
It's been
might,
about,
we might want to try a couple of different ways to reach people, because some people snail mail is the best, some is virtual. I would be concerned, and we can ask McKenna to look into this. If you ask people to put in their address, I think we'll lose some people. I know just from some people who have reached out and didn't want me to say what their thoughts were. So if we can ask where they live, but not their address, we might have a better response, right?
Or
That's
do
the
you
question.
just, yes or no, do you live within the city limits
Yeah.
or something?
and we did discuss the idea of having potentially something mailed, something that could go into the commercial record, as an insert. The website, and then even one person I know brought up a thing about even like a QR code that could be, on display in different points of the city. They can do it. I mean, these are ideas as to how you can try to get, some community input. And then the other thing that what Sean was saying that we haven't discussed, but we could include it in a survey, or we can include it in the town halls. But we have seen a number of cities, and McKenna might be able to say, where they are looking at this kind of dual licensing. And having a difference between the license that you would have if you are an owner and you are either on property and you're just renting your home out, several times a year or several weeks a year versus someone who's away and who is really operating as a business. I've also seen that that they'll issue those licenses depending upon the zone they're in. So if you're in a commercial zone, you would get a license that would allow it to be totally open. And there's without a type of cap because it's in a commercial or a multi-use zone versus a residential having a dual. So those are things that we could discuss. I'd like to hear what the community thinks, because especially the ones who are talking about the residential zones, if you had two different type of licenses, I don't hear a lot of people who are complaining if they've got a neighbor who is renting their home 1 or 2 weeks of summer to kind of recoup some of their cost. But I hear a lot more of the complaints if somebody has a neighbor who's bought the home, who's never here, and they're renting it or available for rent 52 weeks a year. Then it's really a business and a residential. And that's, so I'd like to kind of hear what the public has to say on the idea of having, multiple level of licensing.
Okay. So it sounds like we have appetite for survey, so, and probably just getting it out in different ways. Anyone feel, I know some people feel strongly yes on a town hall. Is there anybody who strongly objects to a town hall?
I just don't know when you would have it. I feel like we are in the process of doing so many things. I think a survey going out and giving them a long time to answer that survey, giving plenty of time, plenty of opportunities, different ways of meeting them. And then if there's still time to have a town hall after that, I just don't know how far along, the process would be at that point. I just know everybody's busy in the summer and I don't.
Right.
You're gonna get them in the summer.
I think, let us take that back. I think we would get some, and I think we would get some people who that would be important. I mean, I don't think we're going to get everybody. And I think to get a good cross section, we'd have to have more than one. And I don't think that's probably realistic. Ryan, thoughts?
I know, Madam Chair, you had asked Stafford before the meeting, so hopefully I'm not putting it on the spot, but, perhaps if there's, folks that are not so sure, folks that are really sure, but maybe I know the task force is, kind of brought up and you've brought up maybe offering some alternative, or later evening times. So that way there's a few more opportunities perhaps for folks to come and provide comments.
Yeah,
Maybe the
that's,
task force every once in a while meets, a little later, maybe starts at 5 or 6 or something.
Yeah.
But
so would you all be willing, every third meeting or so, if we met from, instead of meeting from 3 to 5, met from 5 to 7, so we would then be able to capture some of the people who work during the day?
We could figure out a time that would be okay.
Okay.
It's better.
Okay, why don't we, Ryan, can we follow up like with a poll, or should we try to nail that tonight? How do you recommend going forward on that?
I mean, is there,
How about if we did the first meeting of the month, 3 to 5, the second meeting of the month, 5 to 7. We only have 2 more meetings before we really, because that's July and August. And then September, we have to have recommendations.
Right.
So the second meeting in July, the second meeting in August could be the 5 to 7. It's an idea.
Yep.
And also that coordinates, the staff has to be here late on those third Thursdays anyway. So we're not really incurring, having them stay after
Yeah.
hours.
The only question I would have is you're in July, our busiest months ever, and I know quite a few of us have,
Right, well, that's why I wanted to,
you might have a meeting later, but you may not have the entire task force at the later meeting because this
Yep.
fits.
I know,
this
it's
fits
a bit, I know, this is peak season, yep.
So I agree that maybe a separate time, but it may not be the full task force.
Okay. Is everybody okay with that?
Mhm.
McKenna? Are you,
We serve at your pleasure.
God love you, thanks.
So who's coming up with these questions for the survey? Is that something that we're,
So what we'd like to do then in that case is distill down a lot of the comments we have, and this will kind of tie into our condensed down version 2 of your list that's laid in the packet. And then from there, generate questions for discussion, potentially probably at our July meeting as well, to just say, hey, is everyone happy with this? We have, I think, 3 weeks, so we have a little extra week in there. So that gives us some more time to not only bring back the maps that everyone's been asking about, but then we can help coordinate that with staff as well to see if there's any questions. And draft that for the task force at the first meeting in July to say, are we happy with this? You know, what needs to be tweaked? I guess we'd also ask at this point too, maybe in the coming week and a half, do you have specific questions you would like us to ask, that you send those on to staff so that can be incorporated into us? As you have already indicated, we're already now in our second meeting in June. So we'd like then to first meeting in July, have a draft survey to present to you.
Great.
And this will focus on both the current renters and the guidelines that we want to put forth and what the public wants. And then, like Lauren said, how to cap or come up with a solution. So both those will be in this. Okay.
And our potential goal too with our survey would be to not keep it like a 5-question survey, but we also don't want to have a 50-question survey, because as soon as you see many questions, I know a lot of people just, nope, I'm done. I'm tuning out. So we'll want to ensure it's pointed enough that gets the data that you are asking for, but not so burdensome either.
And what we might want to do with the cap is have that be the primary focus of one of our meetings, because I'm sure we all will have some thoughts. And if we did that at the 5 to 7 meeting, we could all, talk for about an hour and then open it up for public comment for an hour. And so that would be a way for people, because I think that's the topic where we would get passionate and, feedback from folks, and that we want to be sure we really listen to that.
So going into that meeting, if we could have, how many zones are there in the city of Saugatuck?
22?
How many?
22?
20?
21, not counting the CO. If you count the dune grass.
So-
I got a simple, maybe it's not simple, but I got.
20.
36 zones?
No,
22, including dune grass, which is the CR.
Those are zones, but how many classes of zones? In other words,
Classes of zones, you've got like 4 or 5.
So when I guess, so there's residential zoning districts and commercial zoning districts of varying intensity. So we do have a lot of zoning districts, although short-term rentals are permitted in nearly all of your zoning districts, whether they're commercial or residential zoning districts.
So if we, going into this meeting, if we could get each zoning district with the how many parcels are in that district? And then how many rentals are within those parcels per district? That would, I think, help us identify and kind of lead us more towards what needs to be.
Yeah, and
well,
you just said McKenna's working on that.
Just
Right.
some of the ideas we've had about better regulations, enforcement, notification.
Yeah.
Will that be sufficient without having to make
Yeah.
any other changes?
Yeah, Water Street,
We wanna make
Butler
sure
Street
people
should be
understand it's just-
different than St. Joseph and
And if you're
Manor.
asking a question about, that,
Yeah.
I just want to
Yeah.
make sure everybody who's listening, that we're not suggesting that that's what we're looking at.
Exactly,
Just
yeah.
Under the table, what we've already discussed might be enough to be able to address, at least initially, and then if it doesn't, and you still have issues going forward, then you have to start looking at other things. But Kyle, and I'll definitely help you with some of the survey, like a couple of cities that in the, now those were California markets, but
You mind moving your microphone a little closer?
Sorry.
There you go.
when we were doing when they were doing their surveys, they actually had just like those, like a graph, but a chart where they listed like 15 and, 10 to 15 different opportunities, whether you be saying, like we were talking about before, do you think it's a good idea? Or you put in, contact information, and then they have 5 columns. Best idea or high priority, yes, definitely. Yes, important, less important. And so there's like 5 columns, and they just kind of go through and they check off that this they think is very important. This one they don't think is as important. And that's a really simple way for them to be able to quickly look at, 15 or 20 ideas
and prioritize.
and then prioritize. And it gives us an idea. It's like, wow, 80% of the respondents said this is a very important or a very good idea.
I think, Kevin, to your question earlier, I think I already, in our survey, we'd include just a blanket question of, should there be caps? Just number, well, that should first off. And then after that would be, should there be caps in residential districts? Should there be caps in commercial districts? And then based on our feedback and what the task force thinks, maybe just leave it at that. And then take that data back from you guys, and then that can help spur on that next conversation we have with you is, okay, 200 respondents, 98 said, yes, we should have caps in residential districts. And then move from there, but just to get that broad.
That's pretty much how it's going to go.
Mm.
I'm pretty sure.
Sean, yeah.
I got a question because it came up, the word, whether or not your short-term rental was a business. Does our residential zone state that you can't run a business in an R1? And I bring this up because when I was in Lake Town, if you wanted to run a business out of your residential home, you had to go to the board and ask for a special use in a residential. But if you were zoned industrial or C1 or C2, you had those ordinances. So if we put all of these things out there, is that another thing that we can think about of, I mean, simply if you're not homesteaded, if your property's not homesteaded, it's not your principal residence, so it's a second residence.
But if you rent for more than 2 weeks a year, you lose your homestead.
So it was just.
Is that
Yeah,
true?
something I
Or do
was
they
thinking
prorate
of
it?
With that term.
R-
business.
Brian?
Prorated?
Currently, in all of our zones, like we're using the residential zone,
Can, should-
it lists short-term rental as an eligible use of a property in those zones. But again, we've never really defined, this is where some of the things that we may, when we're looking at it from the planning commission's recommending to the council, we will go back and look at every zone, and maybe we have to reevaluate what we call a short-term rental. Because right now, it's very general. It's anybody who's renting their property for, like, it's 7 days or more. So we don't have a distinction in there currently that says that there's a difference between somebody who is renting their home, like I said, as a business versus somebody who's living in it and renting it, 2 weeks a year.
so, right.
So that could go into the ordinances very easily, but we'd have to then, have a whole public hearing at the planning commission level to, revise ordinances and zoning. But Ryan,
Yeah, well, and Madam Chair, I have the expert here on PREs here, one of our city assessors, Don. And so last meeting, we were asked to kind of collect some of the data on non-PREs, the number of parcels that have a PRE. And don't, kind of has that data, working on mapping that for you as well. We were asked for kind of the number of non-homestead dollars and the trend lines on that. We have that data from the treasurer. But one of the questions came up about, and you were just discussing it. What gets a PRE, what doesn't? I'll let Don answer that question. He's best to.
Is this even on? Do I even need this on? You can hear me, right? So what was the exact?
It's not.
It is. My apologies. And what exactly was the question? What gets a PRE and what does not? Is that the question?
So it relates to short-term rental. So like, there was, somebody thought
Somebody-
maybe if it was, rented for more than 2 weeks out of the year, that then it, they don't qualify and.
Right. So in reality, the FCC changed that rule. The 14-day rule was a IRS rule. It was law by IRS. You could not rent out your home for more than 14 days due to that income. That the STC decided that does not apply.
When did that change?
Years ago.
it's like, I can rent mine out 4 weeks.
I got-
So
Better amend your tax return.
yeah, you should really be talking to your tax attorney on that. Yeah, anything I say is not bound by Saugatuck City. Or the state of Michigan, please, yeah, right. So anyways, a PRE basically simply is the intention to own, occupy, and sometime return to that residence. Those are the key words that you have to put it to the PRE exemption. It's so lucid in the Airbnb world versus the bed and breakfast world. You can live there one day and get a PRE. It really is what it comes down, 100% at that matter. Bed and breakfasts are a little different. There's a percentage of that. Usually it's a 50, 60, 70% percentage, depending on how many square foot are allocated to the business versus the residential piece. There's a lot of arguments to be made at that. It's actually in the legislature now, or in the legislative branch now, and they're arguing it just about every day. So it's as black and white as gray can be. So.
Any other questions before we lose our subject matter expert?
I'm more confused now than I was at the beginning of the meeting. So.
Yeah. And I want to thank Don. I told him I'd give him a heads up of what meeting. So I
Yeah,
apologize for
so-
really putting you on the spot, but I know we discussed that.
Easy one.
Answering this question.
That was an easy one. We did.
So.
Yeah. Appreciate it.
Madam Chair, if I might.
Yes.
As Ryan has indicated too, he has provided to our firm the data that's been requested. We are working through the mapping of that. Our intent is to be able to present that at our first meeting in July.
Great.
Some of those maps as well, looking at, where the PREs are, where the additional STRs are. There's a few other items that Ryan has provided to us that I can't think of what those are, but I know we're working through mapping that out, and that will hopefully help tell part of the story that we're asking for here. So
Awesome.
that is in the works.
Okay.
as Well,
Well, can we wrap up any final thoughts on the outreach, the town hall or survey before we move on? We good there? Cool. Okay, so data analysis brings us back to Kyle.
so again, we were asked to provide a little bit more of an updated data analysis listing before the task force based on some of the topics that we heard discussing trends in housing costs and impacts on short-term rentals, trends in the number of full-time residents within the city of Saugatuck, and then also short-term rental caps and economic impacts. So I've worked with Chris on this to put these little descriptions out for you. Unfortunately, he is on vacation this week, so I can't, tie him into it. But he is our subject matter expert in kind of how to collect and analyze this data. So in this regard for us, number one, again, trends in housing costs and impacts on short-term rentals. What our objective is for this is to provide analysis of data over the past 5 years regarding trends in housing costs, which can be conducted within the city of Saugatuck, Village of Douglas, Saugatuck Township, Fenville, and then 3 other comparison communities that the task force asked for. From there, what we'd like to do is also present that in a visual, graphically enriched matter. So it's not just numbers and charts for everyone. So it helps tell that story as well. So it is an easy reference to go to. So that is in essence what the first one is. The second one, trends in the number of full-time residents. I believe we see later in the packet already, residents kind of already done that, but we are happy to go forward and look at the trends in population of Saugatuck over the years to see what is impacted on that. And then maybe even to tie that into the housing costs as well, to see if that has any indicator from there. And then our third analysis option is to discuss short-term rental caps and economic impacts. And from there, we'd like to see, what are the economic impacts of the area? What are the economic factors of, our main corridors as well? And then look at a potentially 5-year trend of analysis of tourism as well for the area. And then again, present that back to the task force in a graphically rich and easy to understand model. So that is what's before you here for discussion.
And as a reminder, once we sort of have a recommendation to make, Ryan will need to take that to city council for approval because this money wasn't in our initial budget. So questions, comments, does this get at some of the information that you would like to see? Some of it you don't feel is necessary, or are there things that you were hoping to see that aren't here?
I'd like to add to that, Madam Chair, if we could as well. We understand that our, paragraph or 2 analysis that we provide here as an overview is not going to be encapsulating everything that the task force might like. By no means are we bound to these descriptions that are right in here. So if there is, room within these different topics you'd like us to see, we want to help and, partner with the city on that. So this is not just a, nope, this is what you're getting. If there's room within that for further analysis, we are happy to do that and want to do that to make sure that we are responding to the inquiries that the task force has. I want to preface that it's hard to
Great.
put that in words on paper for you. So
One thing under the third option that we had talked about last time that I'm hoping we can get at, and I'm pretty sure it was Steve who made the recommendation, if we could find a few communities, and if they're in Michigan, great. And if they're not, I think that's fine too, but more tourist driven towns that put in, significant changes, whether that's a cap or, significant changes in licenses, and hopefully a couple of different options, and really do a deep dive on sort of what led them to that, what they did, and then, a year out, 2 years out, and maybe longer if possible, where they were, what were the intended consequences? Did those happen? Were there unintended consequences? I think from my perspective, some of the economic data, we saw the South Haven survey. I don't know that really it's really hard to draw causality, I think, between short-term renters and tourism. You know, we got a lot of people in Douglas and Fenville and who drive our tourist economy. So I'm less anxious to know more about that, but I would love to know what's worked and what hasn't worked in other communities, and to really find, 3 to 5 examples that we can really dig into. Because I think when we get into the formulating recommendations, that will be helpful. And especially if we're looking at caps, we'll have real data on what happened. So that would be my thought.
And then Madam Chair, just looking at your thought on that, I'd probably tie that into our first
Okay.
presentation on that one.
Okay.
Again, looking at the trend, not only housing costs, but also the impacts on those communities, because we would do a sample of communities. So then take a little bit of what Steve's mentioned as well and tie in, what have been the impacts of those.
Yeah.
So again, it's
Housing
a
costs is-
fluid analysis.
Yeah. Housing costs, and then Lauren, I'll go to you. It's kind of tricky because so many things drive housing values, that again, I don't think we can draw causality. And so I personally don't want to over rotate on that for fear that, I think COVID affected it. I think interest rates affect it. So anyway, Lauren.
Well, there's some benchmarks we can look at, right? I mean, there's national averages, there's state averages. You can look at, inflation, housing inflation data, right? And just compare ours against that. It's going to tell you something anyway.
I mean, I'm just coming from city council perspective. I'm looking at this going, I don't see us spending $7,500 on housing cost trends. Nope. Trends for full-time residents in the city of Sauk, we
I
got
think
that.
we- yeah.
Don't need that. But the $9,000 at the end, talking about caps, I feel like, I know we had talked about wanting to see what other tourist towns outside of Michigan, what they look like is they did caps. Seeing some of that information, some data there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what, Lauren, I was going to just comment on the same thing, that given the fact that we got 2 months of meetings before we would really start to really put together recommendations. One, I'm concerned about the timing of when this data would actually get to us and what the value would be. But also I know that when we were, again, looking at it from a planning commission standpoint, we had a budget in mind, but this would far exceed any budget that we were discussing. And so it would have to be recommended to council, and I can't see council approving these type of expenses. And so that's my thought, is that each of us can continue to kind of bring things in and share it with one another that we're getting from some of these other cities. And I'd be more than willing to do the stuff that I've gotten from a couple of cities here in Michigan as well as the California cities. But I'm just concerned about these budget amounts
Yeah.
and timing.
Yeah.
And will it have any impact over the forum idea and hearing from the citizens, and then us kind of sitting down and formulating our own recommendations?
I think if we could get, so the questions, and so it is, what are some examples of what's happened in other places? And then the other question I have is 30% high. And if we can get a sense of what other communities, like sort of what the range is for short-term rental rates. I think for me in coming up with recommendations, that would be helpful data to have. But yeah, I can imagine that city council would bulk at the costs. Are there others in addition to that where you feel like there's just information you are have a burning need for?
I mean, other than the survey, putting together a survey. He has down that it's $1,000 to do the survey, but I don't know that we can't just do a Survey Monkey on our own.
Okay.
When I think about the three major things that keep coming up at every meeting, noise, parking, and parties. I don't know if that's necessarily going to have an economic impact. I mean, we all know that we don't have enough parking in town, no matter where they come from. So I don't know how those three items are going to be reflected on the economic impact analysis. Again, I think we're really reaching really far out on some of this stuff where I think we got to kind of bring it in-house a little bit, and $9,000 is a lot of money for that particular side of it. But also in the last few minutes, you just mentioned 30% again, which goes back to 30% of what?
Of what?
So, I know we have a very short time here, but this is so important to everybody that is passionate about it. And I don't want to rush through something, and I think we have to kind of get the core of what.
The data that will come in the next meeting, it gives you that idea as to what percentage do you have in each zone will be huge.
I think
And
that's.
whether or not.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, not,
Not appropriate in that zone.
yeah, I think absolutely.
So I sit over there thinking like myself and Holly, that if we start talking about changing every one of our ordinances regarding zoning, it's going to be a lot of work from the planning commission and going to the council, but that is something that we can look at.
Joe?
I kind of look at things a little bit backwards from. I think that. To me, there's. Let's just say that we do levy some kind of cap or whatever, and there probably will be an economic impact if we do that, right? And I 100% on board. There has to be separation between the unit and the residential areas and the commercial areas, right? And there may be an economic impact, and maybe as a task force, we can minimize that economic impact by saying, okay, well, this zone has got way too many, so let's stop and try and get it down. But maybe, we can push some of the traffic into, because I look at it and I say as a resident of the city, I think that if you're living in a residential zone, you have the right, you have certain expectations to peace and quiet and the ability to work if you need to at night and not be disturbed, especially if you got to drive to the airport in the morning or whatever, right? And if you read, the zoning rules around it, you can see it's, single family, blah, 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 right? The intent is to drive a residential community where people can live in peace and quiet. So to me, I look at that and say, how do we protect that, right? And minimize the economic impact, not look at the economic impact and say, how do we minimize the impact there? So I've said it, I got it out there. And
So, and I think, again, I want to say again that we aren't even really having a serious discussion on a cap right now. I think it is something we will discuss, but just to say to everybody, we aren't assuming there will be caps, because I think I don't want to, I want to just, we aren't there yet. So,
Question for
Yeah.
does city council already have an economic impact of tourism? I mean, do we already have that? I mean,
I'm sure there's one that's been done over the years, but I mean, I haven't had an economic impact study in front of me since I've been on council.
The last one that would have been done that I'm aware of was part of the master plan agreement in 2015, 2016.
Okay.
We will do another master plan renewal in 2026. And that looks at, whether it's for the city of Saugatuck or you look at it from the tri-community standpoint, one of the big parts of that is the changes in the community and the economic impact, of different things that you have done or proceed to do. So some of the things like this task force and like what we're doing here is kind of is a prelude to some of the things that will be looked at in a couple of years from a tri-community standpoint when they start to look at this master plan.
so kind of to recap where I think we are. So in terms of where we would like to get more data, it sounds like, and I know I feel this way, but make sure there's consensus around some communities who have made changes, including caps, but not only caps, and what's happened there. So we can just get some lessons learned there. And then if we can get a sense of, for those who do caps, kind of what, or no, not caps, for data on for other communities, especially tourist communities, what sort of the range of short-term rental rates they have, so we can kind of see. And again, I mean, it's not going to be perfect data, but at least we can get a sense of where we are. Does that anything sound wrong or missing?
Just and our zones and
Yes, absolutely. Yep, we'll get the zone, and Ryan's got that. So I'm thinking more from, and then if I know we've got at least two realtors on the phone, if they have housing values in the tri-communities that they might share with us over the past 5 years and comp that to the city. I see a head nod. Yes, thank you, Dick. I think that, I mean, I think some people would find that valuable to have, and I bet you guys could type in a few numbers and get that probably pretty quickly. So thank you. Anything else on this? Kyle, did that get you what you needed?
No.
Okay,
I will work with Ryan after after this meeting and kind of the next steps on this and where to go. So
Okay.
We'll coordinate with that.
and Ryan, from you, anything you want to?
Yeah, and I think the next meeting we have, the plan is to kind of take a look at, your master plan and from a land use perspective and where the community was intending to head, which, can give us should give us some clues, as we look at short-term rentals and what, the community is looking for as far as, neighborhoods and its, uses around town. But we can pull up some of that economic impact data from there and kind of touch on some of those things at your next meeting with data that we have. And I'll do a little research to see if there's any other, more recent, studies that have been done. So.
Cool.
Can we also, is there any way to look at occupancy limits for, I mean, I'm sure you have that data for the short-term rentals, like in our. Yeah, I mean, how many, are 3-bedroom or, 3 occupancy,
Yep.
20 occupancy, whatever. I think that data would be helpful.
Yep. We pulled that data together after your last meeting, and McKenna has that, and they're working on that as part of their mapping and data that they're putting together for you. Yeah.
Great. Anything else before we move on?
Just, if everybody on the task force here, I don't know if, does anybody else have like cities that they have seen that have imposed, that, again, if we can bring data in and share with each other where we don't
Yep.
have to have the expense of having, the third party. If you have something, try to bring it in to the July meeting. And you would either have it copied or send it over to Ryan, and we can kind of put it together in a package of ideas of what's been passed in other places. And you could at least have some conversations at some point around that.
Yeah, and if you send, maybe the efficient way to do that would be to send it to Ryan. If you want to copy me, that's great too. And then maybe we can include those in the packet so folks have a chance to read beforehand. So does that work, Ryan?
And then the last thing that we'll discuss this all the time as we're getting to the recommendation part, but if we are going to make any recommendations. But like Ryan was saying, and I've already mentioned, in the next 2 to 3 years, we will be doing, excessive amount of work on the overall master plan, which is give us an update of where we are, but also where we'd like the community to be in the next 10 to 15 years. So I want us to do what we think is best right now for 2023 going forward. But we always do have the potential of making recommendations, if there are any to be made, that we put into place initially. And then as we have budgets put in future years for this master plan, that we maybe look at that and say, hey, given the master plan in 2026, we need to go back and re-strengthen or readdress some of the things we're doing today. So this could be viewed as something that you kind of do step by step. You try this, and then if that doesn't work, you reassess it in a couple of years, and then you try something else. Just kind of keep it in mind that will be coming down the road within the next couple of years.
So we haven't agreed on any of these expenditures as presented today.
You're right, because I don't think we have so I think Kyle needs to work with, no. And so there's,
It to be on the record.
yes, so we are not recommending we go forward with this plan, and Kyle and Ryan will huddle and get a cost for, and bless Dick for offering to pull some of the real estate trend data for us. Okay. So 5C is initial short-term task force feedback and themes. Kyle, anything you want to say? Now, in our packet, Emily summarized for us all of the input that we had provided, so that we tried to capture everything and dedupe it. And if people, I don't know if you had a chance to look at it, but if there's anything missing or anything you want to add, this again is going to be a living document. So if there are other things, feel free to say so.
I'm just excited that We have more opportunities than.
A lot of
positives.
opportunities. Yeah, I thought that was a great discussion. Yeah, agreed.
Well, I think if we were doing if we're doing a town hall and even this surveys, having these type of things listed and asking people to tell us how important that is in their view, it would go a long ways in us trying to formulate
Right.
a decision as to where we go.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I don't know if it's been added here. I didn't get through the whole list right now and I looked at it earlier, but I think what was brought up with Airbnb and VRBO, that you can have them require that you put the permit number in the listing, else it will not be listed. And I think that's something we really need to focus on.
That's a no-brainer. Yeah.
Yep. Good. We'll be sure that's in there.
Is that something that has to come from the city then? As far as Airbnb and VRBO?
Yeah,
You just-
so I clicked on the link that was in this paperwork and it looks like it's something the city has to establish with Airbnb and VRBO.
Okay,
Ryan, does our short-term rental have permit numbers on them?
Yeah, they do. They have a certificate number. Yep.
okay.
And VRBO and Airbnb gives each property a property ID, a six-digit property ID. So between what's a certified rental through the fire inspection and through Ryan and the listing ID. However, you're gonna have, there's more than just, I mean, Airbnb and VRBO are the two major players in the vacation rental world, but there's several out there. So not everyone, especially the vigilante type rental people, whether they're just representing themselves or just one or two properties, they may not be using Airbnb or VRBO at all. So that's going to be a challenge. I'd be safe to say a good portion of them, and if they want to do it right, would be on VRBO and Airbnb, but then you're going to have two different ID numbers.
But it's a big step forward if we do, it's a big step forward if we do require them to have to list their license number to be able to be
I
advertising.
think
their
we're
house.
talking about two different
Right,
things
exactly.
too. So one is the homeowner listing their rental certificate
Correct.
on Airbnb or VRBO. The other thing you could look at too is in order for them, well, like you said, they're not necessarily, you can't have them list on their rental certificate, their VRBO number, because not everybody uses VRBO. Correct?
You're right, correct.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
But just so we're clear, the problem we're trying to solve is for the homes that are being rented that have not registered with the city, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
So in order to list on Airbnb and VRBO, they would have to fill in their,
Understood.
Yeah, and that's something the city can require for
Yeah.
Verbo and Airbnb.
Well, maybe if when we discuss this in more detail, we can also figure out the penal side of things of the people who are intentionally trying to circumvent the
Right.
the
And
registration.
that'll police
process and what have you.
itself. I mean, someone suggested last meeting or a couple meetings ago to make that public information, and maybe it's just its own separate page on the website, that here are the addresses of the certified rentals. So, if there's a home giving a problem to a neighbor and they're not on that list,
Exactly.
You know.
Self-enforcement.
yeah.
Okay, anything else on this? Okay. The last item under review and discussion is the community-wide policies. And I will confess, I'm not exactly sure. Is that Kevin's?
Yeah, so at your
Okay.
last meeting, there was a suggestion that maybe there'd be some sort of community-wide policy
Yep.
or agreement or something that's required of owners renting
The
out
good
their
neighbor
homes. So,
policy or, yep,
yep, Kevin provided a sample that they use, so to kind of bring it up to the task force for further discussion.
yep. So it seemed like there was a lot of enthusiasm under the opportunities discussion last time to, that would be something we could do. And Kevin was gracious enough to share his. I know somebody made a public comment that it would sort of be good for everybody in the community, but especially STR renters to follow that. Any further input? It seems like that as we get into the recommendation stage, that would be something, it sounded like there was broad enthusiasm. So if there are things that people want to stress from that or talk about, we can.
I just liked Kevin's short and concise thing about noise. To allow neighbors a peaceful night's sleep and to enjoy their morning coffee.
Yep.
I would just, if there's any kind of recommendation for outdoor spaces, whether it's an outdoor deck, an outdoor fire pit, or a hot tub especially, because people talk above the noise of their hot tub. I know I do it. You talk too loud because you're trying to hear each other and it's a loud hot tub. But people just need to be aware when they have outdoor
Yep.
spaces and they have neighbors nearby to be particularly
Mhm.
careful of how
Yep.
loud they are.
Yeah, I liked how friendly this was, and it helped people picture why we, I like the morning coffee so that people can kind of picture why it is that we want them to behave this way.
Yeah, and I mean, this stuff is obviously not black and white. It's just ways to mitigate and minimize issues, call it preventative medicine, try to get to the problem before it happens. But in terms of like company-wide policies, there's some black and white things I think we can propose to the city. We don't need to wait, things like age limit of rentals. I mean, let's come to a community wide and say, ours is a minimum of 25. Things like that can be instituted, I think, sooner than later. Noise, like the sergeant had said last time, and we had all talked about, that will be the trickiest one because it's so subjective. And I don't know if that'll ever go away, but if we can maybe do things like this, we can minimize it. But if it's obvious, and then there needs to be some strict fines and maybe some type of track if there's a history of the specific property that continues to have these issues, then there needs to be consequences, not just for the property representative, but for the traveler as well.
I think too, we can build in if people do have complaints or need complaints to tell them who to call. I mean, I do know people who've said, well, I'm not going to call the police. And if in fact, though, we want them to call the sheriff.
Oh, and they only had
Then we
7
need-
calls. Yeah, they're not calling the police.
Right. So I think we need to tell people what to do, and that will also help us capture, I think, better data. Because I think that data underreported probably the issues.
When I looked at this, I mean, I looked at our policy that we had, and when you book, you get the rules when you book. 30 days before your stay, you get the rules. 24 hours before your stay, you get the rules. So last weekend, we had a guest at a house that we managed next to our rental, and they weren't following the rules. So we had our renters at our main site complaining about the noise with the one that we rented next door. And simply, we walked over there and said, see that policy on the refrigerator? If you don't quiet it down, we're gonna have to ask you to leave the property.
Right.
They quieted right down. We went back to our other guests and says, is this acceptable? And then an hour later, they called and said the people in the pool were making too much noise. But the point of the whole story is we were there, we were on site to be able to address
Right.
a concern and a need, and we did quiet the whole situation down. I mean, they had 4 policies right in front of them, and hands down, it says it. And when they sign the agreement, whether it's Airbnb or Expedia or whatever, they acknowledge to all the rules and regs on what it is. So
Yeah, our guests will not even get their arrival instructions until they've electronically signed that they agree to no one under 25 and the noise and the trash and the occupancy, all that. So I don't know how legally binding that is, but again, it's a way to hopefully avoid issues in the first place. But like Sean just said, like, hey, you agreed to this, you're out, but we're the same way. We'll try to address it and make sure it doesn't happen.
which goes back to the good neighbor policy, but also being on top of it. I know one of the correspondents in the packet was, how far away you had to be to
Right.
be a renter or that, but I feel that it's very important that someone has to be on top of it. I don't care where you are, but a call comes in, an email comes in, you have to be on top of it. I think that's the most important part of it, and be a good neighbor and address.
So that comes down to the ones that don't have management teams in town.
Right.
And I think that's where most people are like, who do we call? Because the management team isn't in town. You guys are great because you're right here, but there's so many that don't
I'm not
have
saying,
that.
I'm not saying it has to be a management company. I'm
Right.
just saying, if you're gonna do this, if you're gonna sign your name on the short-term rental form with the city, you're doing the same thing we're asking our guests to do. You're gonna make sure there's not gonna be noise. You're gonna do everything in your power to adhere to the rules and regs. And I just think that that's important. And some people, I think, just don't feel that that's a level.
Yeah, that'll
I agree.
go a long way. Absolutely.
As long as there's some teeth behind it, I completely agree. I mean,
I mean,
you
every
know.
time we pick up a new site that we got to manage, the first thing we do is go to the neighbors and introduce ourselves. And we ask the questions, what problems did you have here? I don't want to take over a property that has big problems, but I also want to know what the neighbors' concerns are. I think that's hugely important.
Yep.
And be able to say, ask the questions like, hey, if we took this over and we could solve this problem, would that be acceptable to you? And you just work things out and follow up, go back 30 days later and say, hey, we had our first big month. How'd things go? Is there anything that I got to address? That's business 101. I mean, they don't teach you that in college, but you learn it the hard way on the street every time. Be ahead of it and make sure that you don't have a problem. So anything that we can do with that, with these,
Yep.
all of this, it all helps. But if you have nothing in place, you have nothing to stand on. So I do feel that sometimes the simple things are easy to adhere to.
I think maybe if there's risk, right, of being kicked off the property and losing your money, right, could be an example of an incentive to behave, right? Because let's face it, it's behavior issues with the people that are in the house, right? And if there's incentives for the owners to make sure that either the house isn't overoccupied, or that they're on top of the noise as well, right? And that, hey, this has got to be straightened out and fixed, because, there's not much remedy for the people that are surrounding houses that have reoccurring problems right now, right? They're woken up in the middle of the night, they call the police, then they got to try and go back to sleep and get up for work, right? And when that happens every week or every other week, right? There's no end in sight. And I think if we can put something in there that has some teeth, right, that really says, and we can put the actions behind it, right, that enforce it, not only to the renters, but incent both the management companies and the owners, right, to try and keep things in check. Probably go a long way, right, to taking a lot of the concerns away from the community, I'm thinking.
Yeah. So before we wrap this up, Ryan, maybe we should kind of set expectations for what the next few meetings. So I know at the next meeting, we'll have a sense of how we're going to approach the data. We'll get especially in the zone stuff that McKenna's working on. We'll talk about we'll have more framework for what the survey approach will be in the town hall. And then maybe we can also, and I know we're going to talk some about the master plan and kind of how this all fits there, but spend some time getting our heads around, because we've done a lot of the sort of the initial assessment. We'll be getting some of the community feedback and engagement, and then we get into making sure we understand the problem we're solving, what our objectives are, and then sort of what McKenna will be doing to help us, and sort of what what our deliverable is, knowing that we're leading up to presenting to the Planning Commission and City Council in September. Does that sound, I guess, is sensing people want, I think, more definition about, okay, we're talking, when are we gonna get stuff done? Does that help in terms of we can kind of walk people through the process, maybe at the next meeting some, or if you want to talk a little bit about that now or next meeting? Cool. Kyle, does that work for you?
Yeah, works for us.
Okay. So are there other comments on what we've been talking about before we get to public comments? Thank you for those who wrote in, Kevin, for your piece, and I know Brad and Brian had good feedback to share. If any of either of you are on, thank you for that. Anything else? Okay, then let's get to the second public comment period. Again, when you comment, you have 3 minutes. If you could state your name and where you live, and you can talk about anything you'd like. Let's start in the room. If anyone would like to talk.
Good afternoon, Laura Godfrey, 550 Francis. Certainly want to commend Holly and the group here on the terrific letter in the commercial record that came out today. Really nice explanation to the community about what you're doing. I think that's very helpful so people don't wonder what's going on. So great start. I appreciate that. I was awakened at 2 o'clock on Saturday morning. I thought it was a pack of coyotes, but it really was a big party, 2 houses north. I called the police, which I think should be the protocol, because I think you should have a register of that activity. And I don't think you go out and negotiate with a pack of drunken coyotes. I think you let the police go and handle that. You never know what people are doing. There's weapons. Let's let the professionals handle that. So I don't know if they came, but the next morning, the garbage, the beer, all over the place. It was Quaint Cottages. I called them. They were terrific. They came, cleaned it up. They apologized, and they showed me the list of the rules that you indicated. We show everybody, this is the rule. These are the rules. Don't break them. But when you're drunk at 11, no one's paying attention. So I talked to a colleague who rented a VRBO in another state that required him to put $1,000 down. And if any of those rules are broken, you don't get that money back. And that's the teeth you're talking about, Joe. So I know that one of the areas you're looking at are fines and making sure that they're aligned with a touch of punitive, because that's your recourse. The talking is nice, the little brochure is nice, and the rules are nice, but it's being ignored. So I'm hoping we can move from quaint to tough. So appreciate all your excellent work. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else in the room?
Peter Hansen, 441 Spear Street. This Monday, it was June 4th, the Yellow House right across from Joe Clark. Just found out last night from a couple of neighbors that on that Monday night, there was just terrifically loud music around 9:30 at night. And actually, 2 of the homeowners from up at Spear Street were wandering down, trying to find out where the noise was coming from. The music did quiet down by 10 o'clock. The next night on Tuesday, I woke up at 1 o'clock in the morning to hooting and hollering. People were outside at the fire pit. And finally, at 1:22, I called the sheriff's department, the non-emergency number. Finally quieted down about 2 o'clock in the morning. I wasn't sure if the sheriffs had talked to them or they just finally ran out of gas. 2:45 in the morning, I had 4 teenagers having a loud conversation right in front of my house. And I finally went out and confronted them and told them to take it elsewhere. They wandered back to the Yellow House. On Wednesday morning, I called the sheriff's department to find out if the deputies had actually talked to them. They had a little trouble finding my call, but eventually said that, yeah, they had talked to him. I said I wanted to speak with the deputy who had the conversation with him. So I went into his voicemail and didn't hear anything for a couple of days. I finally did get a voicemail from him saying he had talked with them. I also talked with Jamie, who got the information from Ryan, who the manager of the property was, and also the owner's phone number. Called the manager, she apologized. And I texted her later on that evening, said, I sure hope we have a quiet night. And she assured me that both she and the owner had talked with them. Later on that night, I had the privilege of 4 drunks walking up from downtown at 2:07 in the morning. I live right on the corner of Spear and Grand, so I got to hear that conversation all the way up Grand and then down to Spear to another vacation rental property in our neighborhood. You know, I don't know how you prevent people from being just stupid. But, you know, this is what is happening, you know, up on the hill. And this is just the beginning of the season. And we know it's going to continue. It's going to happen again. There's just no consequences. I mean, the city doesn't know about the call that I made to the sheriff's department. Nobody knows about that except the sheriff's department. And I'm not sure that it would be in the report that I made a call about a disturbance at the property. I gotta believe there's more calls than 7 or 8. I'm done.
Thank you.
Oops. Diana Decker, Elizabeth Street. I was hoping that the survey that the city is going to send out, that hopefully those are City of Saugatuck property owners. And I've called the police only a couple of times, but that was just because people were getting hurt when the noise was going on. Somebody was hurting. It's another incident. They were hurting. Last Tuesday at midnight, you know, I heard all kinds of yelling. I opened just to make sure everybody was okay. It was 2 groups and they were laughing and having fun. So I was just so relieved nobody was hurt. So regarding the noise, I'm, you know, if from 2 to 6, it would be great. From 2 in the morning to 6, I wear many hats. I'm a associate broker. I own Dees Lakeshore Farms. So I wear many hats that I just would like to sleep between 2 and 6. I heard comments about loss of community. I also own a commercial building on Blue Star and Douglas. The police there, full-time police, they know you. They know everyone. Everyone knows their name. And I just feel that we have lost that sense here. The police are great, but we do not have full-time police. So when someone's talking about, I don't know, enforcement officer or calling, we get section cars and there are other places also. Regarding zones, you know, there's R1, R2, R3, C1, C2, industrial, those are the zones. And they sign the rules, like the gentleman said, there's no consequences. Some municipalities, they don't have rental ordinances. Like Angie's, they don't have rental ordinance. So that's just a couple points. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My name is Christine Newman and I have a property at 547 Butler Street. And I am first of all, I'm losing my voice, so I apologize. I am a landlord, or no landlord. I am an owner and I have a vacation rental. It sounds like probably or maybe a different situation because we are here 1 week every about 5 weeks. So we're working on projects. We also have a on-site management company. So I'm sorry, in Saugatuck. And we do not live in the state. We actually live in Wisconsin. And so we rely heavily on our management company to make sure we know what's going on with our property. And I really actually like what I'm hearing from you guys about increasing the requirements for people and kind of taking down that party atmosphere that we're running into. That actually was a problem that we had with our house 2 years ago that I was like, I don't know that I want to do this anymore. We had just started doing it. It was kind of our first full summer. And it was, I don't know who, but they like broke our hot tub cover, and broke some furniture. So what we wound up doing is not only our rental is 28 and above. And it's actually kind of like a duplex. So my 1-bedroom unit, I don't have problems with those, but my 3-bedroom unit actually can sleep 8 people technically. So we actually, on our listing, have taken that down to 6 adults. So we've done what we could to make sure that we're not having bachelor parties and that kind of thing in there. So I think there's definitely ways that you can be working with those property owners to say, hey, what can you do on your end to kind of curtail this kind of thing happening? Oh, that's real. Thank you.
Thank you.
I liked what
Can you
Sean and Kevin.
Give us your name.
I'm sorry, Nick Barna, 414 Francis Street. And to do like a synopsis of all of my neighbors up on the hill, and also adding what Joe and Kevin and Sean had to say. I think we need to build in accountability, not just with the police force, but with all of the renters. I think everybody in the neighborhood that's going to be around these rented properties should have the number of the renters, so we can call them. They're the ones that really have the teeth, I should say, to be the ones that are accountable and can really take the bull by the horns and say, look, it stops now, or you're out. And you're going to end up paying. And I think they're the ones that really can make it happen. I mean, we're all, I think, united to be able to make an impact on this. And if we do it right and have the people that really can say, hey, look, this has got to stop now. The police can come and things might stop for maybe a half an hour or so, but then it's back. We don't have a real, full-time police force in Saugatuck. I don't know how well they can really make it happen, but I think by having all of us collectively doing our best to stop it, I think we can make an impact.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Nancy Kimball, 550 Spear Street. I've been meeting with some of my neighbors because I live up on the hill, and we've just been chatting informally. And at our last conversation, we talked a lot about, are the local residents a priority? Are we important? Because we're hearing a lot from the business owners and how important it is, to have this economic benefit of short-term rentals. But are we a priority? And, one of my neighbors said they'd been vacationing in Jackson Hole, and they actually have things where, if you go to the coffee shop, there's a line for locals versus the tourists, because they really value their locals. And if you think about it, if we don't have enough locals, that's one reason why some of these businesses can't be open 7 days a week, because there's nobody here to staff them. So anyway, I was thinking about it and I thought, well, I'm really curious. Are we a priority? So I started Googling to see, what does our master plan say? And what I found for my search was the most recent one was from 2016. And I thought, well, surely there's a more recent one. But now I'm hearing, no, we only do this every 10 years. So anyway, I found it. And if you'll indulge me, basically, this is the Tri-Community Master Plan overarching goal. It is the long-term goal of this joint master plan to improve the quality of life for all citizens in the tri-communities through implementation of policies and best practices that preserve the existing small town / rural character of the area, and that achieves sustainable development, that is, which meet the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And I thought, well, that's terrific. I love that. I hope that that actually has some value, some teeth in it. So I just thought I would share that.
Thank you. I think we've gotten to everybody in the room. Okay, Zoom. Doug? Doug, you
Thank
want
you
to go ahead? Yep.
Yeah, thank you so much. So Doug Rodwald, 413 Hoffman Street. I really do appreciate all the time and effort that everyone's putting into this. obviously a very big topic that has a lot of implications. First, I would just like to say our community's growth, brilliance, how special it is not 100% tied to short-term rentals. Property values, as someone mentioned, with the pandemic and everything that's changed, is definitely not tied to short-term rentals. So as we look at all the numbers and the metrics, we have to definitely make sure we take into consideration all the changes and what's going on here. I think we also have to be mature and thoughtful as a community about what resources we actually have to put towards short-term rentals. A lot of the discussion today have been about issues. And if we cannot police and enforce, policies, whatever we put in place, or can't even keep up with what we currently have, that should definitely be a discussion. The point on Douglas and, the community, I think is huge and something that should definitely, continue to be looked at as we think about what short-term rentals are doing short-term and long-term. The other thing I'd just ask is, what is the goal of this? Obviously, the committee, it's a great committee, definitely indexed towards business. There's one resident on there that does not have some sort of relationship to rentals, to real estate. That's just a resident. There's a lot of us residents here that don't have short-term rentals, that are not in real estate. And we need to make sure that our voices are heard as we move forward here. So I love the conversation. I love the focus on quality of life. I think this should definitely be something that is amplified. It's super easy to measure economic output. It's super easy to measure, dollars and whatnot. But we do need to take into account, as the prior speaker was talking about, what is our goal here from a community perspective and from a committee. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Doug. And a quick comment. Several people on the task force don't have any connections to short-term rentals. I just wanted to emphasize that. So
I would love to see then, based on the committee, if everyone would be open just to share, how many rentals they have, their income, the businesses that they might have that tied to rental properties, just so that everyone understands. Because looking at the first schedule of all the participants, it seemed like there was only one person that was going to be on it that was a resident without a short-term rental. So I apologize if I'm wrong, but just to understand, that would be super helpful.
Yeah, if you go back to and I know this isn't a Q&A period, but go back to the applications, you can see, I can look around the table and there are at least 4 of us who don't have short-term rentals. So anyway, we can follow up with you, or you can follow up with us and we could get you that information.
I appreciate it. That'd be great. I'll send you my email.
Cool. Dick?
Yes, Dick Waskin, 6576 Heron Ridge Road, Saugatuck. Couple of things. One is the township, I believe, I'm almost sure of this, it does have a restriction on the number of occupants that can be in a short-term rental. And they base it on the number of bedrooms, and there can be 2 people per bedroom. So if it's a 3-bedroom house, it would be six occupants. I think that's an easy, low hanging fruit for you to take a look at and perhaps to have the city adopt. They also have an ordinance in which all cars that are staying at that short-term rental have to be able to have a place to park on the property itself. It's a little harder in the city, but I think it's doable. My other comment is just as you were talking about getting a survey, when City Council formed this task force, they were trying to be very even-handed to include all members of the community. So whether it be residents that are permanent residents here, whether it be second home residents, whether they be businesses or service industry people who are all part of the community, who all service Saugatuck and the surrounding area. I think it's important that we keep that flavor of what's going on here, that we all make the community. We're all part of the community and we all have a stake in the community. And I think the survey should be open, to all those members of the community. Thanks.
Thanks, Dick. Anybody else? Keith?
Is this working?
Yep.
All right, good. Keith Cherrick, Main Street, Saugatuck on the Hill. In relation to the Yellow House, that causes all the noise. I live on Main Street. I hear that all the time. When the fire pit's on, I heard the noise all week, but I did not call the police. And in relation to the survey, I believe it should be residents only because we're the stakeholders who have the quality of life that's most at risk here. I'd also like to talk about inspections. Inspections for short-term rentals happen every 3 years. And in relation to some of the houses, I actually wear many hats in this house. I'm a secret agent. I'm a super secret agent, real estate agent. I just trade my own account, basically. I monitor second homes. I only do, I have like 25 homes, and I think 2 of them are short-term rentals. The other 20 odd are people who have second homes. I noticed that with the yearly inspections, they take place, or the inspections take place every 3 years. But I can say there's a house down the street from me. It's 1,500 square feet. It sleeps 9. There's 4 bedrooms. It's 1,500 square feet. And I can pretty much tell you that when that house was lived in, it had mom, dad, and 2 kids. It was basically probably 3 bedrooms, bath and a half. And now it's 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, 2 full baths. And, you know, it sleeps, you know, if you're going to have, there's always 4 cars outside of it. That's on my street. A couple streets over, there's another one that's the same. So I'm almost thinking that houses need to be inspected every year because I think people kind of add bedrooms sometimes. Let's see, what else do I have on my list? Oh, I think somebody mentioned businesses. If I have a short-term rental on the hill and I'm making money and it's a business, or I'm making money, therefore it's a business. Can I open a business in my house? Can I open a bar? Can I open a restaurant? Can I open a retail shop? Can I sell t-shirts? Can I have a, can I make money that way on the hill? I mean, you're basically opened up the hill to be a business district if somebody's making $50,000 to $100,000 renting out their short-term rental. So I'd like an even board here. If we're going to have commercial everywhere, we might as well have commercial. But you know, that's pretty much what I say. It's a quality of life for me. My rule is, and I'm almost out of time. If I'm woken up, I got to go next door and I have to wake up the renters and ask them to be quiet. I'm out of time. Thanks.
Thanks, Keith. Anybody else on Zoom? Okay. So we'll close public comment. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sure. You bet. We did not just close public comment.
Sitting quietly hiding.
You know what? You're the one person I couldn't see, so apologies.
My name's Gary Kemp. I live at 1022 Holland Street. And we have 2 rentals here in town of our own that we own. We used to own and run Marywood Manor Bed and Breakfast. And we had a property management company where we rented about a dozen cottages for different people, mostly friends. I wanted to comment primarily because I think what you're doing is good. I don't want it to become a negative situation that affects the people in the community in very negative ways, both in terms of values of real estate and also in terms of people coming here and enjoying this town and enjoying the environment. We don't have any problems, and I don't know that we ever had any problems with renters. I think we've had one over the last 20 years. And the reason is we spend a lot of time screening them, talking to them, telling them the rules, and inspecting them when they're here. I used to ride around on a motor scooter and inspect our properties even to see what was going on. The properties around us that have had some problems is because the property management companies in this town tend to rent to anybody. They don't care how many people there are, and they don't inspect the properties near as much as they should on a daily basis. And I think that what we need is to really have a feedback mechanism that does in fact lead to some kind of enforcement that goes to the owners of the property. Because the owners need to hear about all this stuff. If they're not hearing about it, yeah, they're getting their check from their property management company. No big deal. But it's brought a lot of really quality people back to Saugatuck on an ongoing basis. They want to buy real estate here. They do. They come and live here. They vacation here. They provide economic benefit to all the businesses here. We wouldn't even have a town if we didn't have the renters. So I want to make sure that everybody doesn't just turn this into a negative, because that's what everybody tends to focus on first, because that's the easiest thing to come up with. So that's all I had to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else I couldn't see back there? I don't think so. Anyone else on Zoom? Last call. All right. So closing public comments, we can all wave goodbye to Lauren as she's sneaking out.
Thanks, everybody.
Are there any closing comments? Kyle, you have anything to?
Nope, we'll work with Ryan on kind of the data analysis, the next steps that we're already working with, that he supplied to us, and then work on more of an internal kind of timeline of where we go. As has already been mentioned, we've talked a lot. Now it's, where do we go from there? So we'll work with Ryan kind of on what we perceive to be those like stages moving
Cool.
forward. So.
Thank you. Ryan?
Yeah, I don't remember if it was you, Sean, or you, Kevin, that had brought up a very similar question that one of the public commenters about, the short-term rental use within a residential neighborhood. And so that gets at the crux of the whole issue. And this gets into our city attorneys on. You could probably tell there's been a lot of probably case law and judges that have taken a look at this over the years. Our state legislature was, at least the last bill that was, before them, was looking to actually define it as a residential use and kind of put that question to bed. Because that's that tug and pull, right? It's kind of there's some commercial aspects to short-term renting, frankly. So, your current ordinance essentially indicates that a short-term rental is a dwelling unit, and has it listed as a permitted use, not even a special land use, but a permitted use in both residential and commercial districts. So that's kind of where it stands. But I understand that tug and pull. That's really the crux of it that a lot of communities have wrestled with. And there's probably some case law that's defined it at this point to a certain extent, and we can certainly dig into that a little bit if you'd like, and maybe bring something back to your next meeting on that too.
Cool. Any task force members have final thoughts? All right. Motion to adjourn? Can you say the whole motion? Second? Okay, motion by Mann, second by Steele. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great, thanks all.